now, at the beginning of Deaf Awareness Week, See Here looks behind the scenes at BBC Two's new accessible breakfast.
What do you do for news in the morning? Do you read the newspapers, watch television, or listen to the radio? Most deaf people can't do these things. Why? Because of the age-old problem of access. See Here have produced some news programs in an attempt to improve access. Two years ago, we interpreted breakfast news for a fortnight. It went down well. And then we produced this, a program about the Gulf War. But what about television as a whole? What about access to what everyone else takes for granted, the daily national and international news? Depending on where you live, you may have access to some signed programs, but on the whole, they are local news summaries. Take a look at these examples.
Now the BBC Wales News, read by Matthew Rosser with signing and subtitles.
Good afternoon. An armed gang has stolen £300,000 worth of 10-pence pieces from a Royal Mint lorry.
God aften, her er nyheder på tegnsprog. Første åbne EF-rådsmøde.
Most people will take for granted that they can hear and understand what I'm saying when I'm presenting East Midlands Today.
Good evening. The loyalist terror group, the Red Hand Commandos, say they killed Vernon Bailey.
Now it's time to take our last look at the news. We have subtitles for people with hearing difficulties.
The Northern Ireland Tourist Board has expressed grave concern over the IRA's bombing campaign against hotels. It follows the early morning attack on the Stormont Hotel in East Belfast.
We've been looking carefully at these examples because a couple of months ago the BBC decided to make news accessible in sign language. But they've left it up to us at See Here to work out how it should be done. So first of all, I decided to speak to Dr. Bensi Wall of the Deaf Studies Centre in Bristol about her research.
Well, the preferences of deaf people are quite clear. Deaf presenters get the highest ratings, followed by deaf interpreters, and then by hearing interpreters. I think that reflects a view of the understanding of deaf community and their knowledge of news and current affairs, not a question relating to the signing skills of the different groups.
In Northern Ireland, television producers from BBC Ulster and Ulster Television have experimented with different ways of presenting the news. They tried both hearing and deaf, interpreters and presenters. They've settled on two distinct styles designed for a deaf audience, one with subtitles and one with a deaf presenter. So why did they settle on these particular formats?
What we were trying to do was to give the best service for the majority of people. And when we kind of looked at the statistical evidence that was before it, you know, we're talking in Northern Ireland of maybe about 200,000 people who have hearing difficulties, and we're talking about 5,000 people who actually use sign language on a regular basis. And within those 5,000, there are variations of sign language. So we kind of look, what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to provide a good service? Are we trying to give people a much broader spectrum with regard to news? So we went for the subtitles.
Sir Patrick Mayhew has said the Stormont Hotel attack was an evil deed carried out by evil people.
BBC Ulster are committed to a service with a deaf and a hearing presenter.
When we decided to do it, we did use interpreters who use sign language, but we then formed a kind of little implementation committee involving people from the local Institute for the Deaf, because I was very concerned that we should involve the customers, if you like, as much as possible in the process, and that it was their advice that people who, in the audience, would really prefer it to be signed by people who were actually deaf themselves, and that's what we decided to do.
There have been calls for action to be taken to improve a stretch of road at Ballymascanlon near Dundalk after the deaths of a South Armagh family of 4 there last night.
That's the news from us. A very good evening to you.
Now that's what the people who make the programmes have come up with, after consultation and much internal debate. But what do the deaf audience think of the different ways of presenting the news?
I don't watch Ulster television anymore. I now watch BBC because it's more accessible. It's clearly signed information, but with Ulster TV, I'm really disappointed with them. I prefer a deaf person involved on screen, next to the newsreader, because it's more clear and comfortable to watch a deaf person signing their way. Interpreters are good and you get the full interpretation, but I'd still prefer to have a deaf person there. Most deaf people, when they read the script, have to do a lot of processing, which is very difficult. Unlike hearing interpreters who can just listen and interpret what's being said, a deaf person has to really work at the script, which probably helps with the translation. I don't mind if the person is deaf or hearing. What is important is that the hearing person is skilled in BSL like us. If a deaf person wants to become a presenter, they must have a very good understanding of written English, as they must be able to present the same information. Mistakes are made and wrong information has been given in the past.
I want to have a close-up of the interpreter and the subtitles to be bigger, especially for old-age pensioners who find it very difficult to see. I mean, I have to sit so close to the TV screen.
In my view, it would not become widely used throughout the community, but that is a viewpoint. It would not become widely used. Possibly.
Now, you've all had a look at that tape and that interpretation. Now, that was done 2 years ago, and it was done as an experiment, that particular tape. It wasn't transmitted. We did it just to see what it would look like. Now, having seen that, what do you feel about it? Any comments?
There's room for improvement, like with the finger spelling. It's very quick, but the signing's great. I got about 90% of the information, and I'm happy with that. I think it's great. The lip pattern and the signing was far too fast. I didn't understand a lot of it as it was too fast. It needs to be paced down a lot, otherwise some deaf people are not going to understand it. You never know. I think it's great that there's an interpreter on screen. It means I can sit back, relax and absorb the information, rather than having to read the subtitles, which can be a real strain.
The viewers seem fairly happy with that experiment. So we've decided to go for that same format. And we'll be signing the breakfast news. Now, why that news?
We found that we could take this opportunity of a service which is on BBC One and BBC Two at the same time, and make sure there was signing on one channel.
So as from tomorrow, this is what you'll see. The interpreter on the right and the picture on the left. But should it be a deaf interpreter or a hearing interpreter? Next stop, the breakfast newsroom, to answer that question.
Oh, yeah. I'm dropping the crickets because I'm going around.
It's also right.
I get here at 3:30, having been here at 6:30 the previous evening when we have a planning meeting. We decide more or less the framework of what is going to go into the programme during the night. Then the team, the editorial team, works here through the night, starting to put all of that together. I get here at 3:30, consult with the night editor, prepare the interviews, go through the newspapers, and then start writing and rewriting the scripts which are on the computer here.
This script ends up on autocue in the studio. Theoretically, a deaf interpreter could read it live on air, if it was guaranteed not to change. This is why the BBC Ulster summary can be read by a deaf person. But it's not that straightforward on national news. Commentary for films doesn't go onto autocue, so a deaf person would have no script. Interviews are live, and the presenter needs to listen to a constant stream of instruction from the control room or gallery. So, as Breakfast News is live, we'll have to use a hearing interpreter.
Through the earpiece, we can hear everything that is being said in the gallery, which is the control room where the director, the editor, and all the rest of the production crew are. Principally, we listen to what the director is saying. Those are instructions about camera angles, but we also get editorial information from the editor who may be passing us information.
Could I have some from Justin, please?
19 and 20 have been dropped from... 19 and 21 have been dropped from the summary.
Okay. Right, okay. 19, pages 19 and 21, what are they? Where's my running order? Yellow running order.
It's going to be quite a test for the signer, because the news has some odd, unusual words in it. There are late changes to it. It'll be fascinating to see, as I'm sure they will, how they cope with it.
12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5,
Run titles.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Opt-in, opt-in.
Hello, good morning to you from Justin and me. The time is 8 o'clock on Thursday, the 16th of September. The headlines: the former Chancellor Norman Lamont has challenged the Prime Minister over his policy on Europe. In two newspaper articles, Mr. Lamont has called on Mr. Major to say categorically that Britain will never join a single European currency.
Stick it in.
Pictures from this village of Worcester, where this massacre took place. We saw those pictures on the 9 o'clock news last night. Can it be said with some degree of certainty, do you think, that Muslims were responsible for that massacre?
Fine, speculation.
Ben Steiner is joining the team of 4 interpreters, and here he's being introduced to on-screen interpreting. John won't be part of the news team, but his experience is being passed on to Ben.
Nick.
You're right. Right. Go smaller.
You mustn't go over here. And it's when you're doing placement of things, you can't
go there.
It's got to come. You should put a perspex screen on here. Okay. Okay.
Can we just chat for a couple of seconds? Let's get some reaction. Hello, good morning to you from Justin.
The news is spoken incredibly fast, and it's a matter of intense concentration for the interpreter to stay in control.
Policy on Europe. Mr. Lamont says he considered resigning at the time, but the Prime Minister said no. Had I known that he would change his mind as he did, I would have done so, Mr. Lamont says. On the economy, there's a challenge to the new Chancellor, Kenneth Clarke. Mr. Lamont said, instead of talking about tax increases, the government should be looking at spending.
Our hearing interpreters are training and rehearsing. But we still have that sensitive question of clarity to think about. Interpreters are, of course, interpreting from English to British Sign Language. At BBC Ulster, the deaf presenter was doing the same thing. Let's go back to Northern Ireland for more information on this question. Who is responsible for checking that the meaning of the signing is the same as the English script?
Good question. I mean, trust plays a large part in all of this.
We had a team there of 6 people who were used to signing in television, and they were the ones that were, as it were, on the ground making the decisions about what signs should be interpreted and when. And I mean, they were the ones that were carrying the can, because if once they left this building or they left the BBC, they were going out and they would meet other deaf people and they would say, I didn't understand that sign, or why did you use that? One of the things that we found with the service that we were offering, that sometimes when our interpreters would arrive for the news, they would get the script, perhaps come up against a new word, and they would have to interpret that word there and then. And the people out that were watching it and receiving this information may not have really understood it. And I suppose in that sense the subtitles did help. But I think that was one of the difficulties that was coming through with our interpreting, that you can't really have people arriving and you know, making up the sign there and then. There had to be some kind of commonality, I think, of language for the deaf.
There are lots of words that can raise problems, and some of them can mislead the viewer.
Murder and manslaughter. Let's say the context of the murder, a policeman was murdered last night. Now that's fine. Now the policeman could have been shot, or he could have been blown up. And to sign, you know, blown up or shooting, okay, that's one element, one side of that. But then if a man was in court for and was charged with manslaughter, the murder and the manslaughter sign were not that dissimilar. So in the context of trying to show that this was as it were a criminal act rather than a political act, there's where the difficulties were coming in.
I think the best way is to work in a team with deaf people and discuss the meaning of these new words. The team should consist of people from the different TV regions, so that if a new word crops up, they would get together as a team or committee, discuss it, and then decide what signs would be used throughout the country. Some people have asked me, what's that new sign? And I'd explain. It could be a Catholic or Protestant sign, an ISL or BSL sign. Maybe I don't know the sign for a new word. So I'd ask deaf people, and may see a better sign. The next time that word appears, I'd use that new sign for it.
Well, I think it needs to be thought about very carefully. Although deaf people do say that they get most of their information about world news from television, clearly they have less access to that information. And so I think it will be of a great help to the interpreters who are working on the news to have an opportunity to discuss background information relating to the news, issues of appropriate choice of signing for the news, possible questions to do with how the information they're interpreting should be best presented. And I think that will be a help to the viewers and to the interpreters themselves.
But is there a real need for some form of feedback and support for interpreters? If so, what should it be like? And who should be doing it? 2 of the news interpreters are trying to work it out with Austin Reeves from the British Deaf Association, and from See Here, John Lee and programme editor Bryn Brooks, who is the person ultimately responsible for what is signed on screen.
Well, watching the 7 o'clock news, I may realise, "Oh, I don't know how to sign that." And there's no one around to ask for support, and that's when I actually need it. Afterwards, I may come up with a sign or decide to sign it a particular way to try and explain the meaning. But then later on, I may get criticised for doing it that way, or it wasn't right, or they didn't understand it. But at 7 o'clock in the morning with no one to consult about how to translate something, that's a worry, and I don't know how to resolve it.
I think it's risky for interpreters to create signs themselves. As a hearing person, I don't think I would create new English words.
If you're talking about regional news, perhaps in Bristol or in Wales, that's a different thing from the national news. Now, I used to do the news in Bristol, and I did that every night for about 4 or 5 years. And when I was doing the news, if a new word came up, I didn't sign it, I'd fingerspell it. And then I'd go down to the deaf club and watch deaf people there. And they would come up with a new sign, which I would take and then use subsequently. But you can't do that with the national news.
Can I ask a question here? When you two were actually doing the news for Channel 4 until it stopped, what kind of policy did you have then? Did you and John and the other interpreter, did you liaise with each other?
When we started, we did try and set up a group to discuss some signs and words that cropped up a lot. But it was difficult to meet up as a team due to work commitments and things like that. It was really difficult.
I think we need to ask the question whether perhaps the BBC should take some responsibility and set up a panel of people with the expertise to develop these signs. Inventing signs by committee I don't like. I'd rather wait for the deaf community to develop these signs themselves, and then I can get them from there. I think a committee who have the responsibility of inventing signs is a bad idea. What if we leave it to the interpreters themselves to go and meet deaf people? When is that going to happen? Can you go to Scotland and Ireland and see people there? You won't have the time. So we have to find an effective method of keeping in touch. See here are tackling the question of clarity and support by liaising with the BDA area councils. The councils will consult viewers around the country and feed the information back to the production team.
Is it possible, camera, that you could pan right a bit without going off the green? Have you got any there? John is a little bit too far into frame. Can you bring him closer to the edge of frame on the left? There's plenty of room there. All his action is on the right. There we are. A bit more. There we are. That's lovely. Thank you very much. And that will help because Nick is very much on the right-hand side of frame.
As our political correspondent Mark Mardell reports, Mr. Lamont's comments 3 weeks ahead of the Tory party conference.
It's funny, at first everyone wanted the picture as big as possible, but actually that doesn't work, because the news subtitles can clash with information on the lower part of the picture. So we've gone for a smaller picture, because it makes the subtitles easier to read. But there is another point. There are going to be 2 styles of subtitles that you'll see on your screen. To find out why, here's Martin Davis, producer of news subtitling.
If we get a script of a film, or perhaps a copy of the film itself, a long time before transmission, say 20 minutes, then we can prepare block subtitles that we edit down to a reading speed of about 130 words per minute. That's a much more comfortable reading speed for most people than verbatim text.
If something comes up that has to be done live and there's no time for preparation, how do you cope?
That's when we use the second form of scrolling subtitles, when we get a specially trained stenographer to take down what they hear absolutely live on air.
Now, will the subtitles and signs match?
If we use the first form of scrolling subtitles, which are pre-prepared, then they will match very closely the sound of the programme, and the signer will be a little behind that. On really live pieces, where a stenographer is working, the signer is likely to be ahead of the subtitles.
We had originally been planning to start subtitling Breakfast News after some of the weekly current affairs programmes like Panorama and On the Record. But when the decision was taken to go ahead with the signing of the 8 o'clock bulletin on BBC Two, we recognised the need for there to be subtitles on the programme as well.
So what are your future plans for Breakfast News subtitling?
Well, we are still hoping to do the rest of Breakfast News in our next financial year, which runs from 1994 to 1995. And after that, all news and current affairs programmes will be subtitled.
This is such an important new service. It makes you wonder why it didn't happen before.
We've been getting the money together, quite frankly. And also, the BBC's been taking a look at the services that it delivers, and the needs of disabled people was one thing that we looked at. And, okay, it's a bit late, but here it is, and I think it's going to be a very good service.
And it's a late mix. Let them say, hello, good morning, this is breakfast at 8 o'clock on, and then we start. So follow me on that.
Counting out of titles, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4,
Lighting
3,
change.
2, 1, 0.
Tunic.
So let's have a recap of what will be on your screens tomorrow morning. BBC One will look like this. You can add subtitles by dialing 888 on CFAX.
Has been shot dead in South London. A civilian was also killed. It's thought the policeman may have disturbed a group involved in drug dealing.
BBC Two will have an interpreter like this. And if you want to, you can add subtitles again by dialing 888. Got it? 4 options. Every combination is available to suit you. Breakfast won't be the same again, will it?
Also in this morning's BBC Breakfast News, programming the past, how archaeologists are using virtual reality to restore architectural ruins.
And what we don't want to happen is to be late, so that we cut back to Nick Ritchell starting the rest of the thing.
Just coming up to 16 minutes past 8 o'clock. This is the BBC's Breakfast News, the headlines this morning. A policeman, PC Patrick Dunn, has been shot dead in a drugs-related attack in South London. Another man was also killed. The Home Secretary has condemned the murder as appalling. Labour MPs have failed to fill the quota of women on the shadowed cabinet. John Smith may announce a reshuffle today. And leaders from nearly 50 countries are meeting in Cyprus on the first day of the Commonwealth Conference.